hill, no one glanced at her. For a giddy, inappropriate moment, she almost laughed as a joke played through her mind. Had she been born an Arab and forced to cover her head, then perhaps the whole of the province of Quebec wouldn't have been able to recognize her on sight. Today, a black scarf and sunglasses hid the mane of hair that had been once described by a political columnist as the color of brick on fire. So she could walk among these people, the friends and family and even the enemies of Jean-Guy Tessier, as they followed his casket up the hill and not cause a single head to turn. The crowd moved slowly, easing around stones that bore the names of farmers and woodsmen and hunters from the village of Montreblanc, an hour and a half drive by northwest of Montreal. They'd come to this place in a gigantic motorcade from the services at the old Gothic Notre Dame Basilica in Montreal, because they were not yet willing to say goodbye to Jean-Guy. He had been special to them all in one way or another, and the sudden violent manner of his death had left them with a mixed sense of unfulfilled promise and indignation. It wasn't unthinkable that his killer walked among them now. Like other revolutionaries or politicians who pressed for rapid change, Jean-Guy had caused fear in his life with his passion, with his energy, with his ideas that were not always seen as tolerable. Long ago, the press had nicknamed him the Che of Quebec. At first, he had taken this as an insult. Later, it became a favorite nickname. But even those who had hated him most respected his power over people, a power that bordered on witchery. They would shake their heads with some new twist of his political strategy and mumble, "Formidable." Low clouds scudded in across the hilltop from the west as Yvonne felt chill through her black dress that hung almost to the ground. The week had begun warm, but dropping temperatures signaled the beginning of Quebec's characteristic brief fall. By month's end, it would be winter and the colored leaves would be torn from the birch and maples that dotted the surrounding mountains. The mourners gained abreast of the hill, and the grave now lay open and raw before Yvonne. She felt cold looking at it and wished irrationally that she had brought a blanket to keep Jean-Guy warm. It had always been her thought to take care of him, a thought that had come as naturally to her as breathing or making love, or even after they had parted, he no longer welcomed her caretaking. His body had been precious to her then. It still was now, over 10 years later. The feeling hadn't died with the man. She had learned that when she heard the news of his assassination from her new home far to the south in the Smoky Mountains. Although she had long ago detached herself from the separatist movement and the Parti Québécois and Jean-Guy, she had tucked her hair in the knitted cap, kissed goodbye the man who was now her mate, and boarded a plane in Knoxville for Montreal. There had been no question in her mind that she would go, dismissing the quiet petulance of the new man in her life, Jed Burnett, with a stiff glance. Men didn't understand love and the lasting commitment that goes with it. They thought that it was a word they said often enough would get a woman into their bed. What they didn't understand was the way love changes a woman. Once done, it couldn't be undone, and some remnant of it would always be with her forever. Perceptive as he was, Jed could not comprehend why she had to climb the hill, following the body of Jean-Guy, clutching the regret that she had no blanket to keep him warm. He would always be. Even death didn't stop. At the top of the hill, pallbearers placed the wooden coffin on the mechanism that would lower it into the straps into the grave below. Yvonne took a deep breath and felt the knot in her throat. She was doubly glad for the sunglasses so that none of the other mourners could see her eyes. She spotted the widow, tall, blonde, pretty. Recognition of the woman who had taken her place brought no pain, nor did she mind that he had thought to marry this one and not herself. She had long ago relinquished possessive feelings for Jean-Guy, and besides, this woman looked lost and perhaps a little terrified. They said that she had been in the house in Montreal when a shotgun was poked through the kitchen window and tore Jean-Guy apart. So it was done, as Yvonne had long feared. She had been with Jean-Guy when the threats on his life had begun, when the phone would click unnaturally, when their mail was delivered already open. She worried every time he left the house to attend the meeting or a rally without her. Every strange car that pulled up to their door brought a sharp edge of panic. Except near the end, Yvonne had said little about her panic. That was part of taking care of him, thinking that it would do him no good to know her fear. He wouldn't have quit the movement anyhow. The movement was as much a part of him as he was part of her. But it aided her over the years, and when she was no longer strong enough to endure the certainty that he would be ripped away from her, she had to leave. It wasn't just politics. What they were to each other had grown stale, and it seemed that in the later years, the only emotional peaks that they experienced were political. He took her leaving as rejection, but kept his control. Perhaps to hide his own pain, he was polite. But eventually the anger faded, and they went about their lives separately. He found the blonde, she the journalist with whom she now shared an altogether different life. A priest stood before the casket and gleamed in a dying light. Words were chanted that Yvonne, standing too far removed from the grave, couldn't hear. Her concentration was on the widow. She tried to imagine this willowy woman and Jean-Guy together, but the picture wouldn't form. What her memory brought up instead was an image of herself and Jean-Guy, passionate, tender, albeit a little reserved, reversed from conventional roles. The knot in her throat settled in her chest and made breathing hard. This was what men didn't understand. She could picture the nights with her and Jean-Guy in the same kitchen where he died, chairs filled with other members of the movement, hot talk of politics in the air, a cup of tea in her hand. The talk would go on and on into the night, a marathon of narcotic words until no more could be said, and that the others would drift away and the house would be quiet again except for their whispered words in the bedroom. It was a lot to bear, the pictures, the panic. Her scarf grew wet around the edges. At least no one could see. She had never grown accustomed to the public displays of emotion. She couldn't even shout at rallies. It wasn't her way. That was the thing Jean-Guy hadn't understood about her. Sometimes his shouting and gestures had frightened her, even though she realized that this was just his way of being who he was. He couldn't be quiet, he couldn't be still. He was an artist who found the right words to stir a crowd. That's what caused the movement leadership to notice him in the first place. Well, it was done now. When Yvonne looked up, the sign of the cross was made of the casket and people were laying roses over it. A tiny old woman draped in black moved forward slowly and placed her roses over his heart. It shook in her hand as she laid it down. It was his mother, her one remaining son at her elbow. Again, Yvonne felt relief that she was unrecognizable. The old woman hadn't liked her years ago and never had a kind thing to say. They had had a contest over Jean-Guy, and eventually, Yvonne supposed the old woman won. Now that became just one more resentment to lay to rest. Turning from the scene, she made her way back down the hill to where a rental car stood parked beside the road with all the others. She was among the first to leave, and the sound of the engine starting seemed intrusive, disrespectful, but it was done. He was buried, and that was all she could do. On the drive back to Montreal, she decided to stay over at least one more night before going back to her new home in the American South. She would return to her hotel and dress up as she had come on the plane, her hair tucked out of sight beneath a knit cap. She would spend one last night with Jean-Guy in the city that they had both loved with a yearning that was instinctive. She would pretend that they were together, walking near the river, and remember how it was with them when they were young, and sometimes talk led to wine, and sometimes talk led to bed. She would call the man whom she loved now and tell him that she wasn't returning right away. He would complain, but he was a man, and men's thoughts of women were sometimes too close to thoughts of property, particularly when their own feelings were involved. It would be good for her not to be too compliant. And a little anxiety wouldn't hurt him. He was a fine man, the equal of Jean-Guy in many ways, and the superior in others. But like any other man, he didn't always understand that she, at heart, was herself. So she would spend one last night with Jean-Guy and remember how it was
when they were young, and Quebec was about to be theirs.